Good evening. My name is Evan Gregory, and this is Bible Answers. We're going to be looking at Simon the Zealot tonight, and as always, we'll have our verses on the screen here so you can follow along with us. And this is brought to you by the North Columbus Church of Christ, located in Columbus, Mississippi. And our website is that's scrolling below me is northcolumbuschristians.com. And we also have a YouTube page, and our YouTube page is North Columbus Church of Christ. And so, as I just said, we're going to be looking at Simon the Zealot. So he was one of the disciples and later apostles of Jesus. And we don't really have just a whole lot to there's not a lot of verses that speak about him. We don't have a lot of information from about him in the New Testament, and a lot of what we can draw from him is how he is described. And so he was described as a zealot. And so in the New Testament times, in the area of Jerusalem, the Jews were basically in four different categories or four different groups. They were the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, and then the Zealots. And these zealots, they wanted to rebel against Roman rule. Now, remember, during this time, so this would be during the first century, the area of Israel is actually a part of the Roman Empire, so they're under Roman control. And so these zealots were wanting to throw off Roman rule. And there were some that they would even consider it to be blasphemy if they were to pay taxes to the Roman government. So they would not want to support the Roman government in any way. And what's important about that is Simon, as we just seen, is considered to be a zealot. And we see that in Luke chapter 6 and verse 15 that he is Simon called the zealot. But we see in Matthew chapter 10 and verse 4 that he's described as a Canaanite. And some translations may describe him as a Canaanian. And I believe some may just call him a zealot again. And this word Canaanite is basically just a transliteration of an Aramaic word, which means zealous. And you can read that on the screen there. It may be kind of hard to read. Again, he's traditionally known, and pretty much, the general consensus is that he was a part of this group called the Zealots. And this picture on the screen in the background, this is a depiction of the destruction of Jerusalem in around 70 AD. And the Zealots actually led a rebellion against the Romans in around 66, which eventually culminated in 70 AD, destruction of Jerusalem, destruction of the temple. And so this is who Simon is. This is the political background that he's a part of, and yet we see where Jesus calls him to be a part of this group, the group of the disciples. And generally, you think about these interactions that Jesus has with people. If you're familiar with the Bible, that he had, people ask him about paying taxes, and he basically tells people to render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar. Just pay your taxes and be done with it. And he's in no shape, form, or fashion leading an actual rebellion against Rome. And so you can see how Simon's, uh, preconceived ideas could cause a problem for him. We also see where one of the disciples were a tax collector, and he would be, I mean, that would be, one of his arch nemesis, I would think. And yet we don't see anything, we don't see him fussing and fighting about this. Um, we do know that the disciples they do have some preconceived notions about what Christ's purpose was on earth. But again, we don't see him just saying a whole lot about this, really pushing on overthrowing Roman rule and basically getting Jerusalem and Israel back to its former glory. And so I think we can draw some points from him. Especially when we get to them being an apostle. It seems that while Jesus was still on earth, disciples in general didn't really quite understand what Christ's goal was. But we do see later on that they do become they seem to better understand what their purpose is and what the purpose is for Christ's kingdom, and understanding that Jesus' goal was never about returning Israel back to back to its former glory, in which it was a earthly, physical kingdom. And so, one thing that I think about, and I think we can draw from Simon, is that he did, I think, from the lack of anything, or lack of any fuss or fight from him, is that at least eventually he did just let go of those opinions that he held. That even those things that he thought may have been right, that he was willing to let go of that. I have several verses on the screen here from 2 Timothy 2, 1 Timothy 1, and Titus chapter 3. And what we see here, and in the context, I believe Paul wrote all three, or rather four, of these scripture here. And generally, I think the context here is he's talking about those of the Jewish background that are pushing Jewish teachings to maintain these Jewish traditions. You see where he's saying that, like in 1 Timothy 1 and verse 4, nor give heed to fables and endless genealogies. Okay, this would be hearkening back to Jewish traditions. Them maintaining those genealogies, and maybe somebody saying, "Hey, we're of this family, so we might be better than you," or whatever it may be. But notice what he says. He says these cause disputes rather than godly edification, which is in faith. In Titus 3 and verse 9, he says, "Avoid foolish disputes, genealogies, contentions, and strivings about the law, for they are unprofitable and useless." And so he's saying, and given if you understand the New Testament, when Christ came, he died, he was resurrected. Hebrews will talk about the testament is not in effect until there is the death of the testator. So Christ's covenant really wasn't in effect until after his death, and then Paul will make it very clear, and other writers, the other apostles, make it very clear that we're no longer under the old law. And this was a problem for the Jews. And much of the scriptures that we see in the New Testament is talking about these issues, that the Jews were hung up on, continuing their traditions, even those things that were part of the law, but they did not matter anymore. But we see 2 Timothy 2 and verse 23, it says, "But avoid foolish and ignorant disputes, knowing that they generate strife." Now, if you read that context of 2 Timothy 2 and verse 16, again, it kind of has the same idea of these Jewish squabbles. But in verse 23, we really don't see that context there. And it may be the same thought, but it seems to be, to me, a more of a general rule that avoid foolish and ignorant disputes. That there are some things it's just not worth fussing about. And even these things may be considered important. There was somebody that was concerned about these genealogies. And Paul is telling Timothy, don't get involved with that. What is the result of that? Are they resulting peace? Are they resulting in unity? Are people edified by these disputes? No, he says that they generate strife, and we have to recognize. And I think there's a principle here that there's some things that they're just not worth fighting about in the grand scheme of things. If brethren, there are some things that brethren, maybe they have strong opinions on something. Maybe they have strong opinions of who you should vote for president or whatever it may be. But recognize at the end of the day that what's that? If we're fussing about that, what is that going to cause for us? Is that something that's going to cause unity? Is that something that's going to cause peace, or is it going to cause problems? And if it's going to cause problems, we need to let go of those things. And I think that we will definitely see that uh, Simon's previous political opinions, they would not mesh with what Jesus taught. And if he continued to push for that, there could not be unity with that. There would only be strife, and so he would have to get rid of that. And again, the lack of information about Simon, and just again, we don't have anything much about what he says. I think we can understand that. I think that he let go of those political ideas. In 1 Corinthians 8 and verse 1, we also see the verses in 1 Corinthians 10 there. In 1 Corinthians 8, chapter 9, and then in chapter 10, Paul spends a lot of time writing about these problems of eating meat sacrificed to idols. We see also the same thought in Romans chapter 14. And what's really interesting about this is Paul makes it clear that uh, it doesn't matter if you eat meat sacrificed to idols. That is just meat. Uh, and so if you think about the two parties that may be in disagreement, there would be the people that would say that it's okay to eat the meat sacrificed to idols, and then there would be another group of people saying this has been sacrificed to idols. This is tainted or unclean meat, so to speak, because it was sacrificed to the idols, and we shouldn't be participating. We shouldn't be eating this. And Paul makes it clear that it's okay to eat that meat. But he also says that these people that have problems with this, you don't just beat them over the head and tell them you got to change. It doesn't matter whether one eats the meat or does not eat the meat. And he's saying, and we see in chapters 8 through 10 that I think he culminates all this in saying that I want to do what's going to help people to be saved, what brings them closer to God. And if there are certain things that are not sinful for me to participate in, or not sinful for me to let go, I'm willing to do that. Notice what he says in verses 31 through 33 of 1 Corinthians 10. He says, therefore, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Give no offense either to the Jews or to the Greeks or to the church of God, just as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many, that they might be saved. Notice what he says. It says, I also please all men in all things. Obviously, he's not talking about I'm engaging in sin. This is not what he's talking about. But he says that there are things that it's a matter of it's just it's a neutral thing. It's not sin whether you do it or not do it. That these things that that he's willing to do that in order to make whether it's to make people like him more, to be more appealing to people, he's willing to do that, and the end goal is that they may be saved. That's what he wanted to do, and I think we see that in 1 Corinthians 8 and verse 1. Notice what he says. He says, "Knowledge puffs up, but love edifies." He could just be beating people overhead and just be arrogant and say, "You're going to do it the way I want to do it. It's my way or the highway." But there would be less people draw to him. And I think there's an example of that, of knowledge puffing up, but the love edifying, caring about those people, thinking about what would be best for those people can be edified by that. And again, thinking about the what type of kingdom Jesus was setting up. Jesus was not setting up an earthly kingdom, and that's what so many of the Jews during that time could not understand. That he was setting up a greater kingdom, and that greater kingdom was not going to be, you know, basically based on certain physical borders or walls or whatever it may be. This is going to go beyond that. And Jesus in John 18 makes it very clear that he says, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here. And even people today, uh, they would still have the misconception that, well, he didn't set up an earthly kingdom there during the first century, but eventually, sometime in the future, he's going to come back to earth and set up an earthly kingdom again. Well, no, I believe the Bible is pretty clear on that, that he's not coming to set up an earthly kingdom ever. And he makes this clear. He says, my kingdom is not of this world. This is not the point. He's not seeking to be a king on earth. And when we think about that, think about where our thoughts should be. Should our thoughts be on um, on the things of the world, on trying to make the world, this perfect utopia, which it's not going to be. Jesus even said himself that, for example, the poor is always going to be here. Whatever we try to do, there's always going to be poor people, regardless of how much we may seek to eradicate it. There's going to be some things just there's going to be bad things on this earth, and so we have to recognize that we have to be thinking about this kingdom that is not on earth, but rather the spiritual kingdom, which is with Christ, with God, in heaven, and that this kingdom is much greater. And again, that's where our thoughts ought to be. Revelation 11, verse 15 says, "And there were loud voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever." Again, the gospel spread throughout the world. This does not mean that all kings and all emperors were Christ followers, but it did mean that that gospel spread throughout the whole world, and there were people within those kingdoms that were following Jesus, and therefore it just spread to all, and it all became a part of the kingdom of the Lord and of his Christ. Matthew 10, verses 34 through 39, we also see where not just thinking about maybe some things that we need to give up, uh, but there's also going to be some conflict that may result of us following Jesus. Jesus says that here. He says, "Do not think I came to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword." And you can keep reading there that you may be thinking, well, what does he mean that I did not come to bring peace on earth? Well, we have to recognize that we can have peace with God through Jesus, but those that follow Jesus, I don't remember, I can't remember where, but it is said in the New Testament that those that are following Jesus, they're going to suffer persecution. They're going to get some pushback because of the way that they believe. And this is what we see here, that there may be people, even of their own families, that are not going to like what they're willing to do. But what he says is that you don't let even those family members get in between you and serving Jesus. He says, "He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me." Christ has to be number one, even before family. And if you're not willing to give up your family for him, he says you're not worthy of him. And so if you're thinking about, well, I want to make my family happy, or I want to appease my family, or I want to, maybe I want to appease them in such a way that we won't have as much drama if I just, stop following Jesus. He says, you're not worthy of me if that's what you're going to do. He says, "He who finds his life will lose it. He who loses his life for my sake will find it." So it's not going to be about you anymore. If you're focused on your life and living it your way, again, you're going to lose that life. But if you're going to lose your life for Jesus' sake, says you're going to find it. And this has already been mentioned, but we think about some of the spiritual and temporal things in this world. So, and you think about going back to Simon the Zealot, that he certainly had goals being a part of that group. That he wanted Israel to be back to the way it used to be, you know, to basically being this powerhouse. Uh, again, those worldly temporary goals. But again, think about what the kingdom was going to be, what Jesus' kingdom was going to be, and that it was not physical in nature, but rather spiritual in nature. And think about what our final goal is. Ultimately, that it is to be with God, to be with Jesus. In Revelation 21, verses 22 through 27, it talks about this city, the city of God. There's not going to be a temple in it, for Lord God and the Lamb are his temple. God is going to illuminate this city, and you see who's going to be a part of that. He says, there shall be by no means enter it anything that defiles or causes an abomination or a lie, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. There's not going to be a bunch of sinners, wicked people in this city, but it says, if they're defiled, if they cause an abomination, if they lie, it's only going to be those that are written in the Lamb's book of life, those pure and holy people. That's what's going to be a part of this city, and this is what we should be working for, to be with Him and not have our sights focused on, maybe making the best of use of our time. Just focus on our earthly goals here. 2 Peter 2 and verse 13 says, nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. Peter, in that context, he's talking about at the end, all the world, everything, the earth is going to be burned up. It's all going to be done away with. And so it really doesn't make sense that if all of these things are going to be burned up, why in the world are we spending so much time worried about what's happening here? But he says, we, this being believers, Christians, says that we're looking for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. This is what we set our mind on. This is what we set our hope on. Again, something more, not just what's happening here. Again, in Luke chapter 9 and verses 57 through 62, similar to what we read previously, Jesus basically saying, earlier we will see that basically if you love your family more than me, you're not worthy of me. He's saying you got to be really willing to give up really anything, and even, give up those things that are really important in our lives. We see here that people are saying that they are following or going to follow Jesus, but they got something else to do first. We see where this one is told to follow him, but he says, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. Jesus said to him, let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and preach the kingdom of God. We see here that another one was also, they said that, hey, I'm going to follow you, but let me first go and bid them farewell who are at my house. Seemingly, not just, not the worst thing they could be asking to do. Certainly, I mean, you would think, well, yeah, let me first go tell them bye before we go and follow you. But Jesus here is making a point. He's not saying stop burying people, or stop telling people bye. Just leave in the middle of the night and nobody knows where you're at. He's not saying that. But he's saying you can't let any of this stuff get between you and following Jesus. You can't let, again, your father, your mother, your sons or daughters, your brother or sister, you can't let none of this get in. And you can't let the things of the world get involved with that as well. He says, no one having put his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God. That if you are looking forward, you're looking forward to that goal, you're following God, you're looking back, which I would take this as you're looking back, you're turning back to the things of the world. He says you're not fit for the kingdom of God. So really setting the standard that there's absolutely nothing that can be between us and serving him. Matthew 6 in verse 20, we'll start just that last sentence there in verse 21. It says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where are we storing up our treasures? Are we storing up our treasures on earth? Or are we storing up our treasures in heaven? Again, wherever our treasure is, there our heart was going to be also. you're going to know whether you have your sight on earthly things, the things on the earth, or things in heaven. It's going to be in your heart, and ultimately, we see where also Jesus says those things that come from your heart, you're going to be able to see it with the things that you say and the things that you do as well. So you will be able to know where your treasure is. Now, finally, I say finally, we're getting on time. We'll make this one last point here, and we'll stop here. We're starting to get a little long on our time here, but one thing with Simon, and again, we think about that group of zealots that they had very, very strong political opinions and what they should be. They should be fighting the Romans, is what they believe. But yet, the New Testament paints a totally different picture about what the believer's attitude should be towards the rulers. In the New Testament, you will never see Christians called to take up arms against a government. You just won't see it. Doesn't matter what anybody will say. Now, I know that there's a lot of people that will try to get around that and make certain excuses and say under certain situations you can, or whatever it may be, or justify in whatever way. The plain and simple fact is that the New Testament never gives a Christian the authority to fight and overthrow a government, period. Rather, like what we see in Romans 13 and verses 1 and 2, it says, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. Wait, Evan, did that mean the Roman authorities as well? Yes. Does that mean the American authorities? Yes. He says, be subject to the governing authorities. Well, what if I don't like them? What if they're Democrats? Still got to submit to them. What if they're Republicans? Still got to subject to them. He says, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. Very plain what Paul says here. And I know this day and age, it seems as people have more and more strong or maybe polarizing opinions on government. And you see protests pretty regular about a variety of things, a variety of issues. But again, we're pretty clear here that you're to be subject to the governing authorities. You're not supposed to be fighting against it. And Simon, in his past life, he would be one that would be advocating to fight the government. If there were protests during that time, Simon would probably be towards that front of that group of people that are protesting and fighting against the rulers, the cops, the soldiers, whoever it may be that they're contending with. We see Titus 3 in verse 1 says, remind them to be subject to rulers and authorities, to obey, to be ready for every good work. Again, emphasizing once again to be subject to rulers and authorities. But what can we do for authorities? Is there anything that we should be doing for them? The one thing that we see as far as how we should, I don't know if interact is the right word, with these governing authorities, or what we should be doing for them. The one thing that we do see is in 1 Timothy 2, verses 1 and 2. It says, therefore I exhort first of all that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings and all who are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in godliness and reverence. So again, we're supposed to be subject, but what are we supposed to be doing for them? Are we supposed to be protesting? No, rather, we're supposed to be giving supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving thanks for all men, for kings and all who are in authority. We're supposed to be praying for these people. We're not supposed to be fighting against them. And so that's what we should be doing. Now, one last thing you may be thinking, Evan, is there anything that we can do to kind of, If the government is mistreating me, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to just lay down and take that? Well, I don't know if maybe in certain situations, yeah, but we also see where in certain situations, like for example in the book of Acts, that there were certain rights that were given to Roman citizens, and that Paul would exercise those rights to his benefit. And so, when we think about this attitude towards the governing authorities, is first and foremost we have to be subject to them, but we do have some rights or if we have some rights rather that are given to us, okay, like for example the right to appeal a ruling or legal ruling, like what we'll see in the next passage. Well, if we're given that right, we can exercise that. If we have a right to, maybe say something. I don't know. Maybe write a letter to the governor or whatever. Whatever it may be. Or if we have some rights that are given to us. For example, the right of we're innocent until proven guilty. For example, or the right to a public defender or whatever it may be. There are certain things we have as a benefit of being a citizen of a country. And what we do see is that, at least what we see with how Paul interacts with that government, that I think is clear that we can uh, exercise our rights. But again, we have to be careful that we don't go or get into a situation where we may be saying, "Oh, we're exercising our right," but we're actually going to in with a mindset of resisting or trying to overthrow that government. We still need to have that mindset of we're willing to submit to that government. In Acts chapter 22 and verses 25 through 26, and it says, "And as they bound him with thongs, Paul said to the centurion who stood by, 'Is it lawful for you to scourge a man who is Roman and uncondemned?' When the centurion heard that, he went and told the commander, saying, 'Take care what you do, for this man is a Roman.'" So apparently here, Paul was fixing to get scourged, and Paul says basically he uses a question, but he's saying, "You can't scourge me because I'm a Roman and I'm uncondemned. You have no right to do this." And the centurion hears that, he recognizes that, and Paul, and he heeds Paul. He says, "Take care what you do, for this man is a Roman." Knowing that he was a Roman gave him some benefits that apparently non-citizens would not have. Paul recognized that, and again, he used that to his benefit. In Acts chapter 25, verse 11, Paul is defending himself. He says, "For if I am an offender, or if I have committed anything deserving of death, I do not object to dying. But if there is nothing in these things in which these men accuse me, no one can deliver me to them. I appeal to Caesar." So he appeals to Caesar, the ruler of the Roman Empire. And if you kept on reading, you would see that that appeal is granted. That he's told, "To Caesar you will go, because you have appealed to Caesar." So he has a right to appeal, in which he's able to do that. And so, again, we do have we can interact with government. We can talk to government. We have these benefits that we can use because we are citizens. For example, here in this country, we may have different benefits in another country. But again, going back to what we just talked about, within all of that, we have to make sure that we are still subject, that we're not working to overthrow a government. We're not working to resist that government in any way. We're still going to be loyal subjects to that country. And so, again, I think there could almost be an entire lesson just on what we see Paul doing in Acts 22 and Acts chapter 25, and maybe some applications of that. But at least it would give us some things to think about. And going back to our lesson with Simon the Zealot, Simon had no, if he's a zealot, he has no notion to being subject to the Roman Empire. They are thinking about getting rid of it. How do we resist them? That is their goal, and we see that is simply something that's not compatible with New Testament Christianity. So we have a few more slides left. We're going to end it there. We're getting kind of long here. This is a live show, as always, and so if you got any questions or comments after the fact, since we're almost fixing to end, uh, you can leave them here. I'll try to respond to them. We also put these videos up on YouTube. Again, our page is North Columbus Church of Christ, and you'll be able to find this video up there soon, and also our previous videos. We have a whole big old pile of videos that we've done, years worth of videos, and so there's certainly plenty of topics that we covered there. But I hope that this has been useful for you, and I hope that you all have a good day and a good rest of the week. Thanks.